Hi, this is Numeric Citizen here. I'm back at using Craft Daily Notes, and this enables quite a few interesting use cases. Let's get started. Before talking about the new use cases, I want to reflect and explain why I'm returning to Craft for daily journal. I think that it's a good idea for me to write on what I'm working each day. It can be about a new blog post, a new article, something about photography, something about craft, or something about creating YouTube videos. And so each day I'm writing those activities inside a Craft Daily Note. This process enables some interesting stuff where I can go for a specific document and see when I worked on that document and what I was doing on that specific day. For example, for creating this YouTube video, for example, I'm using a template. By going at the backlink section at the bottom, I can show each day that I work on that. And as you can see, I started working on the idea of this video on November 25th. And then I work on that on December 3 and today where I'm recording this video. It gives me an interesting way at looking at my content over time. It also enables me to have an overview of what I did this month and over the course of the year, because I'm writing all the stuff that are significant, and that it makes me also more focused and more intentional about what I'm doing as a creator, as a content creator. So that's the main reason why I decided to return and start again writing or journaling inside Craft. The other thing that I find interesting is that I'm also starting or restarting using Craft Tasks. Having this one view of my day where today I have those tasks on my plate. Maybe I have some other tasks that I did not complete on a specific day, which are brought to me in this in my current day. Having that in front of me helps me to be more focused when I'm working. Overall, I think it's a better creative experience by combining those two together. And as you'll see later in the video, this enables some other interesting use cases too. Let me show you how I'm starting a new day with Craft Daily Notes. As you know, you can go to the next day from here, or I can just simply go to the calendar view and then click on this day and then create a new daily note. Now I'm going to use one of my templates using the /TE for to bring this menu item. Type the first few letters of the Craft Daily Note name. From there, I'm not able to use keyboard shortcuts. And I don't know if people at Craft are watching my videos because it's not the first time that I'm talking about that. I'm going to click on that one here, make sure that's the right template. Obviously, that's the right one. And then boom, that's the text that I'm starting with. I'm going to get today's weather using a shortcut, which brings this type of text. And the reason for that is because every day I want to record what was the weather forecasts and conditions. You'll see maybe later in the video. Next up is to select a header image. And because the content is weather related, if I go in the style here and then select a cover image and then unsplash, I don't know if you saw that quickly, but if I click there, there's a few weather images appearing because that's the theme of the current daily note. I'm going to instead select that. And depending on the mood that I want to have to this, or my personal mood, I'll select an image where I like the tones. Select cloudy, for example. Let's say I'm selecting this one. Next, I'm going to change the backdrop. The starting color will be something around blue, and then the ending color right here will be something about being more yellowish, something like that. Yeah, so that's the general idea. And then from now on, when I'm working. I'm simply expanding one of the section that I want to write something in, and then that's pretty much it. And at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I go in this section here, I copy paste this prompt into ChatGPT, and I ask ChatGPT to create my browser summary for the day, because I'm browsing the web and I want to keep track of which websites I went to, and maybe summarize what are the themes covered by my browser activities for that day. So that's where I'll put it. So you get this basic idea of how I'm creating a new daily note. I expect this to be improved in the future, where I will be using Apple shortcuts to create all that stuff for me without having to do it manually. But that's for another project. Now I want to talk about my first use case of Craft MCP. As you know by now, the Craft team released support for using MCP with Craft, which means that you can have a client from, like example, ChatGPT or Claude to interact with your content, and then from there you can ask any type of questions that you might have. And then this is what I thought it would be a good idea to, since I'm resuming using Craft Daily Notes since mid-October, I thought it was a good idea to test this process of going through MCP from Claude to ask for some questions. So I'm going to show you this right now, how it went, the first experience I had with configuring the interaction between Claude and Craft. As you can see here, that's the question I ask. Looking at my recent Craft daily notes, where did I spend most of my activities? And then from there, you can see that Claude is going through a process of inspecting or crawling the content of my Craft documents or my Craft daily notes. I'll show you later we configure that MCP connection. And then you can see there at the right, there are some issues with Claude accessing the content. And then it tries again with other methods to access the content, and it starts to crawl the weekly reading summary from Craft Notes and look into that, and then creates this summary for 2024 and 2025. And that's something that it's not the expected results, because I was only referring or expecting for November of this year. So I kept reading this answer, and obviously Claude was having issues at accessing my content. Later, I asked, did you look at my Craft daily notes for November? And it tells me, oh, you're right. I actually didn't successfully access your November 2024 Craft daily notes. I don't know why it's referring to 2024, because we are in 2025. And so it tries again. There is some issue here again to access the content. It tells me there is a problem accessing your content through the MCP connection. And then it's trying to do some other things, like, which is pretty not obvious what it's doing. And then it tells me that there's an issue, and then I should make sure that my connection is configured correctly. It gives me an error, and then again tells me that it cannot access the information, and may ask me to confirm that the connection to my daily notes is correctly configured. Obviously, there was a change that I made in my MCP connection configuration, because I decided to put a password on it so that to make it more secure. And then that's when I asked to try again. And then from there, it still was having some issues accessing the content. If I look at those warnings, still tell me that there is an issue with the connection to my Craft daily notes. And the way I decided to solve that problem is to recheck my MCP connection first and make sure that everything is fine, and then start a new conversation with Claude to make the context free of any past answer or questions, and the problem was fixed. Now let's go in more details about how you configure an MCP connection in Craft. First, you go in the Imagine tab there, and then you see all the connections that you have. The one that I was using is the MCP for daily notes and tasks connection here. And as you can see, this little animation is so cool. And this is why I always use a header image, because it's nicer. You click on that, and this is where the configuration is done. The naming is important because from my experience, depending on how you name the connection, it's easier to refer to that connection in a conversation or in the prompt with Claude or ChatGPT. That's the one I use before recording and testing the process. But if I were to do that again, I would change the naming to something else, maybe more precise or less techy. I wouldn't mention the MCP. I would just write maybe something, my daily notes and tasks, and then that would be it. The URL is decided by Craft, and then you decide to give access to the documents. The permissions level is read-write. For my use case, it could have been only read-only. It's more secure like that. And set the password to access it instead of using a public access, which is way more secure. And then this is where you set the password or change it if you already have it. The other thing I want to mention is I'm using Claude over ChatGPT, even if I've been a long time subscriber to ChatGPT. I'm using Claude because the way you configure MCP connection in Claude is simpler, and it doesn't need to be in a specific or specialized mode, because in ChatGPT right now, the MCP support is in developer mode only, and it's kind of awkward to configure. And when you are using the developer mode to access your MCP connection from ChatGPT, the memory is not updated, so you kind of are working in a small bubble, which I don't like. That's why I decided for this to use Claude, and frankly, it's very similar to ChatGPT. So that's the portion, the configuration portion you do in Craft. I'll show you later how you configure the connection in Claude, but I'll switch to a different use case for that. When I was testing this MCP connection against my daily notes, I decided to take a step back and reflect on if it was the best MCP use case to start with. And I decided to try something else. I decided to instead use my blog post digest that I'm getting every month from Microblog. As you probably already know, I'm blogging on Microblog, and each month there is a digest that comes out as a newsletter that I'm saving into Craft, so that now I can ask questions about those blog posts in the past month. And if I do that for all the year, then I can ask question about my writing habits for all the year, which brings me to this idea of having Craft as a way for me to help me write a year in review blog post where I kind of reflect on the past year and what I wrote about, and the subjects that I covered, and the mood, and everything that was that are kind of the highlights of my writing year. So this is the actual use case that I'm going to use with Craft MCP support. Again, I'll be using Claude to do the prompting and access my content. So I created a new MCP connection called Blogging Year in Review. This is where all the documents for all my monthly digests are stored into, and then the configuration is pretty much similar to the one before. The naming is also easier, Blogging Year in Review, which means that it's easier to refer in the Claude conversation. So far, I have 9 documents declared in this connection, but as I'm writing or saving more past digests, I'm going to save them into this connection so that I can access the whole year for the prompting. The permission level is read-write because I have a document, an empty document in this set of documents where I'll ask Claude to write the actual draft of the year in review document or article. And this is why I set the permission level to read-write instead of only read. And also the access mode is a password protected, of course, because it's it might be sensitive information, but I think it's always a good idea to use a password access mode. So that's the configuration from the Craft side. Now I'll switch to the Claude side and see how it goes when you configure such connection to the Craft backend. To create a connection in Claude, you have to copy the URL that you have in Craft, and then you go in settings in Claude, and then you go on the connectors, and then you click there's a button here at the behind, which is add custom connection. And from there, you give it a name, and then you give the remote MCP server URL that you will paste, and then you click add. So that's the connection I added. From there, when you look at the connection itself, if you look at the configure, you will see that there's all the permissions that you have to access this content. Make sure that the connection is always allow for each request, because if you start a new conversation and then you refer to this MCP connection and the permissions are always asked, this will kind of slow down your interaction with Claude. So this is what I'm always using, the always allow permission, and it's easier like that. See how the conversation went with Claude. The first question I asked was, what can you tell me about my blogging habits this year so far? And then you see Claude will try to start analyzing the content of my documents. And the first try it did was there was an error. And then it tried a different approach to access my blogging data. And then eventually was able to access the digest from October and November 2025, which is the good year. And then it gets all the blocks from the documents. We can see that from what it is accessing. This view is interesting because it gives you an idea that it is accessing the right content. It's always a good idea to validate and verify what's going on in this conversation. And then eventually the response comes up, and then Claude will slowly write the one answer and then covers all the themes and focus areas that I talked about this year. And later I ask another question, can you list the companies that I'm talking about? And then sure enough, I get all the companies and the products also that I'm referring to. And then the conversation goes like that for quite a while. And then I ask it, what were the recurring subject matter this year? And it gives me a few subjects about iPad Pro limitations, software quality declining at Apple, and stuff like that. And then again, it gives me a real good summary of my writing. Now I'm asking, can you, I want you to look at my blogging summaries instead, because I think there was an issue regarding the response I was getting. And then later, again, there was some issues with Claude complaining about toolless execution. Eventually, it came back with a more to the point answer, and I thought it was better answer. So you can see that the conversation is rather long. The last prompt I asked was, by looking at my blogging year in review documents, what were the recurring subject matter this year? And it kind of rephrased my question because I want to make sure that I'm getting the right answer, because I know my content, I know what I wrote about this year, and I want to make sure that the answer is more in line with what I did. And then it seems that the answer is more complete, and now it is really referring to the right month to write this answer. This conversation kind of took quite a while to execute, and the consumption of credits on Claude is rather extensive. That's why you want to make sure to use the right model. I did some experimentation with Sonnet 4.5 and then also Opus 4.5, and This one gives better answer, but it takes a longer time to answer the question and also consume much more credits. So this is something that you have to consider and pay attention to when you are asking question on a lot of documents that are rather long. And this is what I'm going to show you. What are the documents actually that I was referring to consuming and trying to get answer from? My blog post digests are stored in Craft, obviously, in this folder. And in this one, there's the blog post digest for 2025. If I click on that, you will see that I have a few blog post digests that I already processed. In this video, I was on October and November, but since then I added more digests. And when I click on that, you will see that I have a copy of all the posts I did on my blog. And then at the beginning, there's a summary where I did ask a few questions about this digest to kind of summarize in more simpler or maybe shorter version of all the writing during the month. So this is the documents that I'm exposing to the MCP connection in Claude and do my summarization and my analysis of my writing for the year. It's time to share a few observations coming from my experiment with Craft MCP support and Claude. The first thing is that if you make a change, any change in this configuration on the Craft side, remember to do the configuration back in Claude to make sure that the connection works. When you are creating a new connection in Claude to connect to your MCP endpoint in Craft, there's some kind of validation that occurs at that time. But if you change later some parameters in the connection on the Craft side, again, Claude might have problems accessing content. And the problem is that the issues are not always obvious. You have to kind of really read the answers that you are getting to make sure that Claude is accessing the right content. And the other thing is that the time to process information can be rather long and will consume credits on your Claude side, because this is where the processing is happening, which means that the credits on Craft side are not consumed by this connection, because this is not Craft who is doing the AI processing, but this is the Claude side of the equation that is doing the processing. To summarize this use case, I wrote a document called the Year in Review Writing Assistant that I'll share with you, and the link will be in the video description. And in this document, there's a diagram showing you here what's the overall architecture of this workflow. As you can see here on the right, the microblogs multi-post digest are saved into Craft space, and then from there, those documents are exposed through the Craft MCP endpoint and then prompted using Claude to interrogate or ask question against that content. Eventually, I can ask Claude to write a draft of this year in review document and then create a new document in this exposed MCP connection in Craft. So overall, the process that I put together to better write year in review documents each year. That's it for today's video about Craft MCP support and my new use case for Craft and Claude AI. I hope that you learned something along the way. I hope that you liked this video. Just hit like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and see you guys for another one very soon. Bye.